During World War II, the world witnessed a collision of industrial might, human ingenuity, and boundless brutality. New tanks, aircraft, and chemical agents rolled across the battlefields. Yet the weapon that inspired the greatest terror in soldiers often hid inside unassuming field emplacements. Around 1942, the German army put into service a machine gun marked by just 2 letters and a number, MG-42. That laconic designation concealed a design that became legendary. Its rate of fire, ease of manufacture, and ghastly sound turned every frontline encounter into a slaughter. In this video, you'll learn how the idea of the MG-42 was born, why it became the centerpiece of German tactics, and what impact it had on fighters on both sides of the front. We'll show technical details, but also human stories of gunners and their victims that often go unnoticed. In a moment, we'll reveal how this Hitler's mower figured in clashes on the Eastern Front, in Normandy, and in Italy, and how it influenced later weapons development. Don't expect a dry list of data. What unfolds is a path that ties the mechanics of metal to the psychology of war and the fates of specific people. Germany entered the Second World War with the experience of the Great War, when machine guns first decided the fate of entire formations. In the interwar period, designers tried to create a universal machine gun that would combine light, mobile use with the ability to defend a fixed position. The result was the MG-34, an elegant, precise weapon made of high-quality steel. According to military historian Arnold Blumberg, the MG-34 weighed approximately 24.3 pounds and, on a 52-pound tripod, could fire at about 800 rounds per minute. With interchangeable mounts, it could be configured as a light machine gun for offensive operations or as a heavy machine gun for defense. Although the MG-34 was technically superb, its production posed a problem for the German economy. Each unit required precision machining, expensive materials, and more than 200 parts. No arms factory could keep up with the quantities needed for a rapidly expanding army. Ordnance planners noted that the MG-34 cost about 327 Reichsmarks, and its tripod another 400 marks. That was significant at a time when millions of conscripts had to be armed during active combat. In addition, because of the high quality of the materials used, the MG-34 proved sensitive to dust and dirt, something that became apparent on the Eastern Front. German command began looking for a way to produce a machine gun with similar effectiveness, but at lower cost. From September 1939 onward, the German armed forces expanded at an unprecedented pace. Industry had to adapt to total war, and arms makers were forced to cut costs. According to an article on the Warfare History Network portal, around 1940 the task was assigned to a team at the firm Janus Gross Fuss Metal and Lauverve Fabric, which developed an experimental machine gun, the MG-3941. Its designer, Dr. Ernst Grunow, sometimes referred to as Werner Gruner, spent 6 weeks on machine gun maintenance courses to understand infantry needs. Grunow concluded that crews would value a weapon that was light, fast, simple to operate, and undemanding to produce. The key innovation was construction from stamped and pressed sheet metal. Thin steel components could be stamped and welded instead of expensively machined. This drastically reduced material requirements and cut production time by more than 30%. High demands for quality and precision were replaced by pragmatism. Thus, in factories at Zule, Borzigwald, Vienna, and Döbeln, a weapon was born that soldiers soon nicknamed Hitler's Saw. The newly designed machine gun bore the designation MG-42 and entered service in 1942. Grunow's model used an innovative roller-locked rotating bolt made from practical stamped parts. As soon as a shot generated chamber pressure, rollers unlocked the barrel, allowing the bolt to snap rearward and feed the belt. This mechanism had a minimal number of moving parts and enabled the weapon's enormous rate of fire. From the MG-34's initial 800 rounds per minute, the MG-42 reached an unprecedented speed of about 1,000 rounds per minute. Some sources indicate that anti-aircraft variants achieved 1,500 to 1,800 rounds per minute. Ergonomics also improved. The weapon weighed approximately 11.3 kilograms, 25 libeng, and measured about 1.2 meters in length. Its 20.9-inch, 53-centimeter barrel could be swapped in 3 to 7 seconds thanks to a side opening in the shroud. Crews used asbestos gloves for barrel changes because, during prolonged bursts, the barrel would glow red-hot. Soldiers were trained to fire short bursts of 3 to 7 rounds, with a maximum of 22 bursts per minute, to conserve ammo and prevent barrel warping. In this video, you'll learn how these technical improvements affected tactics and how the MG-42 reshaped the composition of infantry squads. In a moment, we'll show how a machine gun still in its infancy soon became the central element of German infantry. The MG-42 earned many nicknames. Americans called it Hitler's chainsaw or Hitler's lightning. Soviets dubbed it the linoleum ripper, while the British used the term Spandau. All the nicknames captured its unmistakable acoustic signature. As described by American soldiers Orville W. Unsonny, Martin, and James Wilbanks, the MG-42's sound resembled tearing cloth or a zipper. Martin said it devoured piles of ammunition and men. Its crushing rate of fire, around 1,200 to 1,500 rounds per minute, made individual shots merge into a single continuous roar. When the gun opened up, many soldiers felt as if several weapons were attacking them at once. Standard cyclic rate for the MG-42 was about 1,200 rounds per minute. Some versions, especially for anti-aircraft use, reached up to 1,800 rounds per minute. Practically speaking, because short bursts were recommended, the effective rate of fire was far lower, about 154 rounds per minute, according to the U.S. Army. A 50-round belt was emptied in 2.5 seconds, a 75-round drum magazine in 3.5 seconds. Ammunition. The gun used the standard German 7.92 Keck 57mm Mauser cartridge. Belts were linked, and separate cassettes could be coiled into metal boxes. The MG-42 fired only in bursts. Single shots were technically impossible. In skilled hands, however, it was an extraordinarily effective suppressive weapon. Some crews used the Lafette 42 tripod, which weighed 45 pounds, about 20 kilograms, and, with an optical sight, allowed accurate fire out to 2,200 yards, 2 kilometers. The mount also provided limited anti-aircraft capability. One of the most important factors in the MG-42's success was that it was far cheaper and easier to manufacture than the MG-34, which required 150 labor hours. The MG-42 took only about 75 hours. Thanks to stamped and welded components, production costs dropped to around 250 Reichsmarks, less than half the price of an MG-34. According to a military industry database, Mauser, AG Werke, Steyr, Grossfuss, TASS, and Maggot produced a total of about 129 units daily. In 1943, more than 116,725 units left the production lines. In 1944, 211,106. Altogether, by 1945, over 400,000 machine guns had been produced. The MG-42 was air-cooled and operated with a short recoil to drive the bolt. Rapid barrel heating was the biggest problem, so crews had to keep several spare barrels on hand, often 6. After roughly 250 rounds, a barrel change was required. Prisoners of war, however, reported that, in practice, 400 rounds could be sustained. Günther, a member of Wehrmacht training, recalled that when firing in northern Russia, they had to learn to swap barrels blind, in snow-covered gloves, without interrupting the fire. Weight with bipod was about 11.3 kilos. On tripod, up to 25 kilos. A wooden stock with a deep curve allowed the weapon to brace firmly on the shoulder. The trigger could be operated even with gloves. Standard feeds were 50-round belts, which crews linked into longer runs to reduce the number of magazines. A 250-round box weighed about 10 kilon. With these parameters, an experienced gunner could lay down a devastating curtain of fire. Accuracy at long range, however, suffered. Harsh vibration and bouncing made the gun climb and drift during long bursts. Thus, the MG-42 was best suited for suppression, covering fire, and cutting up attacking formations. The high rate of fire placed heavy demands on logistics. Young gunners often boasted enthusiastically of their MG-42, only to discover it came with the burden of ammunition. German manuals recommended no fewer than 1,800 rounds per gun crew, equivalent to 72 25-0-round boxes, as written in the source. Belts had to be kept clean and straight to avoid jams. In summer, the metal links heated up. In winter, they froze and broke. In this video, you'll learn how machine gun crews solved these logistical problems and how they were supported at the front by ammo carriers and permanently attached armorers. The MG-42's great power would have been useless without a well-organized crew. The ideal team consisted of 6 soldiers: the gun commander, an NCO responsible for selecting sectors of fire and coordinating bursts; the gunner, who manipulated the weapon and trigger while keeping it shouldered; the assistant gunner, who fed the belt and helped change barrels; the tripod bearer, who carried the Lafette 42 mount and was armed with an MP-40, and 2 ammunition carriers with Kar 98 rifles, who hauled ammo, spare barrels, tools, and handled security. As the war dragged on and Germany faced manpower shortages, crews shrank to 4 or even 3 men. On some Eastern Front sectors, the machine gun became the core of an independent team supported in combat by only 2 riflemen. In some accounts, a single soldier ran an MG-42 while his comrades carried only ammunition and guarded the surroundings. The MG-42 became so important that it changed the structure of the entire German infantry. Earlier systems, in which machine guns merely supported riflemen, were turned on their head. According to research by Warfare History Network, a German infantry company of 150 men in 1944 had roughly 15 MG-42s, with 30 to 50 men assigned to service them. An infantry squad consisted of 10 soldiers, a commander, 2 machine gunners, and 7 riflemen. Whereas pre-war machine gun sections were relatively large, the new structure gave machine guns a central role, while rifles largely served in a supporting function. The practical result was higher firepower and the ability to stop attacks more effectively. German tactics rested on several principles. Surprise, machine guns were camouflaged and held fire until the enemy entered the killing zone. Fire and movement. The machine gun team shifted among several prepared positions to confuse the enemy. Stellungswechsel tactics. Coordinated fire. Multiple guns created interlocking fields covering various approaches and preventing flanking. Economy of ammunition. Although the MG-42 was infamous for its appetite, the crew was to fire bursts only when necessary and save belts for decisive moments. Alternate positions. Besides the main nest, crews prepared lateral and rear positions, the so-called Schweiger MG, the silent gun to which they could move if the original position was destroyed or discovered. In defense, the MG-42 was usually mounted on a tripod and dug into a covered position. The Germans favored reverse slopes or forest edges, so the gun remained hidden, yet could rake attackers in enfilade. During attacks or to seal a breakthrough, the crew shifted to semi-direct fire from the bipod. In the assault, Machine guns covered infantry advances from elevated positions. As the rifle squads moved up, the guns displaced to new sites to maintain continuous fire. Young soldiers learned that they had to protect machine gunners during movement, dig their pits, and carry ammunition. The gun then created an iron wall of fire behind which shock troops could advance. In this video, you'll see how these tactics worked in practice and what machine gunners felt as they watched enemy formations crumble under their fire. In a moment, we'll reveal concrete stories from D-Day, the Eastern Front, and the Italian mountains. One of the most famous examples of MG-42 use is the story of Heinrich Severloh. This young German soldier was assigned in spring 1944 as a driver and batman to an officer in Normandy. In Strong Point WN-62, on the eastern end of Omaha Beach, several machine gun nests were tasked with delaying the Allied landing. On the night of June 5th to 6th, Severloh took his position and waited for the first landing craft to approach. According to his later memoirs, he had at his disposal an MG-42, belt reserves, and several spare barrels. Severloh was ordered to open fire only when the Americans were waist-deep in water. Around 6:30 a.m., when the boats approached to 450 meters, he began firing short bursts. In post-war interviews, he described how each 3-second burst left a trail of dead bodies on the beach. Throughout the morning, he swapped several barrels, and when belts ran out, he used his Mauser rifle. According to Warfare History Network, Severloh fired about 12,000 rounds. Another source cites 13,500 rounds and 400 rifle shots. That corresponds to over 400 kilos of ammunition, and some authors note that such a quantity would have been hard for one man to haul. Historians don't agree on the exact number of casualties, but accounts by American soldiers indicate that WN-62 was among the most destructive positions after 10 to 12 hours of fighting. It's said only 2 machine guns remained in action in that location. Severloh ultimately survived and, in 1963, visited the United States, where he met the American chaplain, David Lewis, whom he had seriously wounded during the landing. The two men became friends, and their story became a symbol of reconciliation. Even so, Severloh wrestled with guilt until his death. His admission shows how crushing the psychological burden on a machine gunner could be. Though he had obeyed orders and defended his comrades, he had to live with the knowledge that in a few hours he had killed or maimed hundreds. Another harrowing image of the MG-42 emerges from the memoirs of German soldiers who fought the Soviet Union. On the Eastern Front, not only tactics, but physical endurance were tested. Freezing winters, muddy spring thaws, and scorching summers put extreme strain on men and machines. According to testimony recorded in the National Security Journal, the MG-42 impressed with its reliability. It could function in the sandy dunes of North Africa and the Russian steppes. Soldiers, however, struggled with ammunition shortages. Each belt weighed about 3 kilograms. A crew carried no fewer than 1,800 rounds, over 50 kilograms in ammo alone. Add spare barrels and the tripod. Gunners thus used fog to get as close as possible. Once they moved, resupplying them under fire was nearly impossible. Some recollections describe how, in the Siberian winter, the gunner had to protect the metal links from freezing. He wore them under his greatcoat and warmed them with body heat before firing. The Fallschirmjäger, paratroopers whom Hitler never again sent on a major drop after Crete, became an elite infantry force by war's end. In the ruins of the Monte Cassino Abbey in winter 1944, the MG-42 became the main defensive tool. Parachute units had to cover wide swaths of shattered terrain, and MG-42s, sighted in the rubble, could halt repeated British, Polish, and New Zealand assaults, A soldier of the 1st Parachute Division later wrote that they could watch Allied squads crawl among the stones as their machine guns sliced hedges and piles of debris to pieces. As soon as the attackers fell back, the Germans sprinted to other positions. The MG-42's flexibility let them shift fire within seconds. An Allied officer summarized this tactic. They could make one man feel like a whole squad by dashing from position to position with the machine gun. An anonymous account from autumn 1943 describes a typical day for an MG-42 gunner in the Carpathians. I spend the night with the weapon. My ears are still ringing. My loader, Hans, sometimes falls asleep with his head on the belt. By dawn, the fog lifts, and I see silhouettes. I wait until they're in the middle of the field. Then I press the trigger. 3 seconds. Their shadows fall. Then our rifleman, Dieter, starts running with the ammo box, shouting at me, "Save it! We've got the last 100 rounds!" Preserved in a private diary, this testimony shows how monotonous yet psychologically destructive the job could be. Even while protecting comrades, the gunner had to watch his bursts tear human bodies apart. In this video, you'll hear other human stories that let us peer past statistics and show the true cost of a high rate of fire weapon. In a moment, we'll reveal that physical exhaustion wasn't the only challenge gunners faced. The MG-42 became part of the war not only through technology, but psychology. The Allies quickly gave it nicknames meant to convey its lethal effect. Hitler's Saw, Hitler's Lightning, Hitler's Bone Saw, Linoleum Ripper, or Spandau. German soldiers used the term Knochensage, bone saw, conjuring a chilling image of what the weapon could do. Each nickname sprang from its distinctive sound. The extreme rate of fire made individual shots merge into a continuous high-pitched tone reminiscent of ripping linoleum or sawing bone. According to Orville Martin of the U.S. 13th Armored Division, the MG-42 sounded like lightning. Soldiers under its fire for the first time described the sensation of entering a battlefield full of enemy weapons. In many cases, they hit the dirt at the first bursts and tried to hide. That instinct had decisive tactical consequences. American and British units had to thin out their attacks and rely on artillery or tanks. The MG-42's eerie sound was so demoralizing that U.S. command made a training film to bolster soldiers' courage. In it, a recruit hugs the ground under machine gun fire, while the narrator exaggerates that no one else in his squad is bothered by the noise. A contest follows between Browning machine guns and the German MG-42, where the commentator asserts that, impressive as the fast German gun is, paratroopers should attack when the enemy is changing barrels. The film ends with reassurance. Their bite isn't as bad as their bark. This propaganda attempt tried to curb fear of the sound, but veterans recall reality was different. As one American officer in France noted, attacking an MG-42 frontally was considered suicide. Soldiers preferred to wait for artillery or a tank to silence the nest. The film, however, did teach one truth. The barrel change lasted a few seconds, during which the gun was vulnerable. Allied soldiers learned to recognize pauses between bursts and use them to advance. The MG-42's psychological effect wasn't limited to soldiers. Civilians in combat zones came to associate the specific sound with approaching danger. A Polish farmer's diary notes that in the winter of 1944, residents preferred to hide in cellars as soon as they heard the mad rattling. It meant a fight was near. Coupled with propaganda presenting the MG-42 as the embodiment of Nazi technical superiority, the weapon became a symbol of terror. Even after the war, it appeared in films and memoirs as a sign of German combat effectiveness. In this video, you'll see how fear and respect mingled with admiration for the engineering, and how the MG-42 shaped perceptions of deadly German technology. In a moment, we'll uncover the limits and problems gunners had to overcome. Not every soldier became a machine gunner. The German training system selected the strongest and most disciplined for gun crews. They had to think quickly, work as a team, and withstand extreme stress. Training included not only technical maintenance, but also tactics, first aid, signals, and range estimation. Candidates practiced barrel changes in sand, mud, and snow. Instructors sometimes poured water on their hands during practice to simulate sweat, and always used asbestos gloves. At the front, a gunner faced far more. In cold weather, the barrel stuck to bare skin. In heat, burns threatened. Long stretches in trenches meant undernourishment, poor hygiene, and constant stress. The gunner was also an obvious target. By reflex, enemy snipers and artillery aimed to silence the machine gun, because killing it opened space for an attack. In practice, the MG-42 gunner was not just a shooter. He was also a logistician. A standard 50-round belt weighed almost 3 kilograms. If a crew carried 800 rounds, that meant nearly 110 kilos of ammunition. Add spare barrels, each over a kilogram, tripod, personal weapons, and rations. Every step became hard. Soldiers on the Eastern Front said the toughest task was climbing hilly ground under such a load. More than once, they had to roll ammo crates down slopes and go back for more. Machine gunners sometimes felt more like pack mules. People joked the gun was a privilege for strong backs. Accounts from Italy say Fallschirmjäger could haul the MG-42, ammo and all, up steep crags to surprise the enemy with sudden fire from above. Much of the public imagines the gunner as an unfeeling soldier who fires into crowds. The reality was more complex. Many MG-42 crewmen understood the immense destructive effect of their weapon. War diaries describe how faces of the fallen came back to them at night, how they heard the gun's song even in sleep, how they feared Judgment Day. Heinrich Severloh wrote that the bodies on Omaha Beach flashed before his eyes when he sat down to eat. Some tried to depersonalize their task, talking about reaping wheat or mowing grass to shield themselves from reality's weight. Other sources say crews aimed at upper torsos so enemies would die quickly and not suffer. Training included psychological preparation. Instructors reminded them the gun saved comrades' lives. If it failed, the unit was in danger. This argument was meant to lessen guilt and strengthen duty. Even so, after the war, many former gunners struggled with what we'd now call PTSD, though the term wasn't known then. The most dangerous moment for an MG-42 crew was the barrel change. The process took 3 to 7 seconds. The gunner opened the side cover, pulled the red-hot barrel, and inserted a new one. That pause was the enemy's best chance to advance. Some veterans preferred to burn themselves rather than lose those precious seconds. Others tore at gloves to keep finger sensitivity. American training films taught soldiers to recognize that pause and rush forward when the roar stopped. In reality, the pause was so short that many attacks still ended in carnage. The MG-42 was a high-priority target for the Allies. Snipers were often tasked to eliminate the gunner. Artillery tried to silence nests with salvos. German gunners therefore had to shoot fast and disappear faster. Tactics taught them to shift constantly and to dig alternate positions. In this video, you'll see how gunners protected themselves from snipers, the importance of camouflage, and how the MG-42 served in artillery and anti-aircraft mounts. In a moment, we'll show how the MG-42 figured in battles across the wider context of the war. Thanks to its speed and lightness, the MG-42 changed the face of German tactics. While the Allies built infantry around riflemen with machine guns as auxiliary support, the Wehrmacht inverted the concept. The machine gun became the squad's center, and riflemen grouped around it. This approach let the Germans create a solid curtain of fire with fewer men, vital in the war's later phases as manpower dwindled. Companies and battalions learned to use the MG-42 as a heavy machine gun when needed. On a tripod with optics, the MG-42 could deliver accurate fire at over a kilometer. In this configuration, it became indispensable for defending bridges, passes, and key crossroads. In mobile operations, lightness mattered. A soldier could sling the gun over a shoulder and be back in action within minutes. The MG-42 was deployed in Africa, the Soviet Union, Italy, and in the defense of the Atlantic Wall. German soldiers valued its simple servicing. Dust and sand, which plagued the MG-34, had little effect on the MG-42. In the Soviet Union, generous tolerances let it function even in deep frost. In Normandy in June 1944, the MG-42 became a nightmare for American units. The Atlantic Wall's fortifications were built so guns could sweep the beaches in crisscrossing fire. The MG-42s scythed down wave after wave of Allied soldiers. On Omaha, formations had to advance under direct fire. Crews used a grazing fire tactic, aiming roughly 45 centimeters above the ground to hit soldiers and those trying to lift the wounded. In Italy, machine guns held mountain passes and forced the Allies into small group attacks that were easy to stop. In the Ardennes in the winter of 1944-45, the MG-42 supported offensive thrusts as the Germans tried to rupture Allied lines. During this operation, MG-42s were often mounted on jeeps or armored carriers to accompany infantry in rapid advances. Though the MG-42 was a technological marvel, it had weaknesses. Its high cyclic rate burned through ammunition, and the gun overheated quickly. Compared with the American Browning M1919, it required more frequent barrel changes. It also lacked a single-shot mode, making precise long-range fire and ammo economy harder. Some crews battled inaccuracy during long bursts, as vibration and recoil shift moved the barrel. Another problem was the weight of ammunition, which slowed movement. Gunners and their carriers tired easily on the march, reducing their ability to maneuver quickly. When stocks were exhausted, the gun fell silent, or the crew risked sprinting for resupply, often under fire. The MG-42 was commonly mounted on vehicles, half-tracks, Panther and Tiger tanks, or armored cars. In the retreat battles of 1945, it suppressed infantry attacks and protected vehicles from close assault. In some cases, it was paired with a mount allowing anti-aircraft fire. The high rate of fire suited the destruction of low-flying aircraft. In urban combat, MG-42s were braced in windows and embrasures to cover intersections and narrow streets. The MG-42 intrigued not only Allied soldiers, but Allied designers. In 1943, the U.S. Army tried to build its own version, designated T-24, chambered in .30-06 Springfield. The conversion proved unreliable, and the project was dropped after the war. But the idea resurfaced with designers at Sacco and General Electric, resulting in the M60 machine gun, which drew on principles from the MG-42 and FG-42. Post-war Germany reintroduced a variant of the MG-42 adapted to NATO's 7.62 51mm cartridge, the MG-3, still in service with the Bundeswehr and other armies. Variations on the MG-42 inspired Swiss, Spanish, Austrian, Belgian, and American designs. In American and British veterans' memoirs, the MG-42 often appears as a symbol of fear and respect. A British 8th Army soldier recalled battles in Tunisia when the MG-42's sound froze the blood in his veins. even as he admired its simplicity and reliability. A U.S. paratrooper in the Ardennes sketched how, during an attack, he heard the chainsaw and instinctively dove into the snow. When he raised his head, his entire squad lay hit. In shock, he crawled back to command, as resupply was impossible. Allied tactics had to adapt. Soldiers learned to spread out, dig deeper foxholes, and wait for artillery or tanks to silence the nests. Americans also gradually introduced their own lighter machine guns with higher rates of fire, such as the Browning M1919A6, which could at least partially compete with the MG-42. During the war, German and Allied manuals warned that the MG-42's high rate, up to 25 rounds per second, led to significant ammo expenditure and that the weapon was hard to keep on target. Instructions recommended short bursts of 5 to 7 rounds. After the 7th round, German instructors said, the cone of dispersion increased markedly, wasting ammunition. Soldiers were taught to re-aim between bursts and wait for the most favorable moment. A translated manual found with units on the Eastern Front warned the gunner to press the stock firmly into the shoulder, place his feet correctly, and lean forward when firing on the move so the weapon wouldn't run away. Emphasis was placed on proper bipod placement and even weight distribution so the gun could be used for days without exhausting wrestling with recoil. For the heavy, tripod-mounted roll, the guidance differed. A German order from May 1944 stated that bursts should be about pea-size shots long, as in the source, and should only follow careful sight adjustment. Longer fire was deemed irrational because ammunition was scarce and production taxed the war economy. A Soviet-translated manual recommended limiting bursts to a maximum of 7 rounds and changing the barrel after every 200 rounds. These instructions show that discipline was a key part of training. Even on the wildest fronts, rounds were counted, and the most efficient use of fire sought. German infantry were taught to calculate how many short bursts they could afford to hold out until reinforcements arrived. According to an American intelligence bulletin, the optimal rhythm was 22 short bursts per minute, about 154 rounds in practice. These recommendations prove that even the Germans didn't spray from the hip with the MG-42. They understood that every bullet could decide an outcome, and that an overheated barrel could endanger an entire squad. Maintaining fire discipline was hard, especially during mass attacks, but the ability to fire short bursts and conserve barrels often decided a crew's survival. The huge demand for the MG-42 came with massive industrial strain. Constructive simplicity, stamped sheet, rivets, and welding cut production time from 150 to 75 hours and dropped the price to 250 Reichsmarks. Even so, enormous labor was required. In 1944, the Berlin Lübecker Maschinenfabrik in Lübeck employed 3,109 workers, 1,931 German men, 539 German women, 467 foreign women, 752 foreign men, and 120 prisoners of war. Many were forcibly mobilized from France, Poland, or the Soviet Union, housed in barracks on site and working continuous 3-shift schedules. After the war, owner Bernhard Berghaus was investigated by the Allies for abuse of forced labor. Barrel production for the MG-42 required special technology. The high rate of fire caused extreme heating and wear, so barrels had to be changed after a few hundred rounds. BLM therefore developed a cold hammer forging process, in which 4 hammers struck the barrel blank several times per second without heat. The rifling was formed during forging itself. The result was extraordinarily durable barrels that withstood the MG-42's thermal shocks and required less maintenance, while saving operations like drilling, hardening, and hand-cutting the bore. Thanks to these innovations, German industry could produce up to 129 MG-42s per day. In 1943, more than 116,000 left the lines. In 1944, over 211,000. Behind these impressive statistics, however, stood thousands of workers who spent the war at machine tools. Their unseen labor became weapons that now stand in museums as reminders of a time when human labor and engineering ingenuity were harnessed for mass destruction. The MG-42 ended up not only with elite formations, but also with ordinary infantry on the Eastern Front. The diary of German NCO Kurt Kroeger offers a unique glimpse into the daily reality of a machine gun section. In an entry dated July 31, 1944, he describes how his newly assigned group of 4 men with one MG-42 moved to the Piteska River. In thick fog, they built a temporary bridge to cross the stream. Kroeger then bathed in the icy water before setting fire to 3 haystacks, so Ivan, as he called Soviet soldiers, would have no place to hide. One man stood guard while the others slept, and then led the first reconnaissance patrol, which found the nearby forest clear. In the following days, the group moved constantly. In early August, Kroeger wrote that their guard post had to cross the river by boat after the bridge was destroyed. 2 more men arrived with ammunition, and his comrade Straub even looted a beehive for honey. Other entries note that during one attack, Kroeger had to counterattack with his MG-42 to stop a breakthrough, and how, at night in dense fog, his group repelled a Soviet patrol with the machine gun and grenades. The diary shows that machine gun crews had to do more than shoot. They built bridges, patrolled, and procured supplies. The MG-42 was not only an instrument of killing, it demanded carpentry, fieldworks, and logistics. These personal notes pull us into moments that don't appear in official reports. Fleeting calm between fights, dry humor and irony as soldiers tussle with bees or empty stomachs. The MG-42 appears as a constant companion, at times a burden, at times salvation. In this video, you'll see how personal records complement objective statistics and help us better understand not only the war, but the people who lived it. In a moment, we'll reveal how the MG-42 carried into the post-war world and became part of culture. The diary also captures the small things that illuminate everyday reality. In quiet minutes, soldiers stole honey, bathed in rivers, baked bread, and searched for livestock. At other times, they built new obstacles, dug trenches, or learned from local farmers how to repair a torn cart. Though surrounded by war, they tried to find moments of normalcy. Preparing MG-42 positions often meant rebuilding homes, barns, and fields. Civilian property was turned into fortifications, and locals endured forced labor and requisitions. Thanks to such diaries, we see that fighting occurred not only between military units, but also intruded on the lives of ordinary people whose homes and farms became part of the front. Other entries describe the logistics of ammunition. Kroeger repeatedly notes sending men for belts and barrels, because without them, the MG-42 was useless. Soldiers hauled dozens-kilogram crates along muddy roads while shells whistled overhead. A single delayed delivery could decide a section's fate. These mundane concerns remind us that the MG-42's terrifying effectiveness was not just a matter of mechanics, but whether someone had the strength and courage to carry the next belt under fire. After the Second World War, the MG-42 became a symbol of the Nazi war machine. Museums worldwide exhibit examples. The National W-Boot Museum in New Orleans notes that the MG-42's rate of fire was so high that American propaganda had to downplay its effectiveness. Many exhibits show the MG-42 alongside the MG-34 and other machine guns, so visitors grasp the technological leap made in a few years. In post-war films and novels, the weapon appears as an iconic object. Soldiers who met it at the front describe a mix of respect and fear. Memoirists emphasize that the MG-42's sound haunted dreams and nightmares for decades. At the same time, it inspired works of art. Writers and screenwriters used it as a symbol of relentless technological progress set against humanity. Beyond Germany's MG-3, MG-42 principles echoed in various post-war machine guns. The American M60, nicknamed the Pig, combined belt feed from the MG-42 and elements of the German FG-42 rifle. The M60 had a lower rate of fire, 550 to 650 rounds per minute, but kept quick-change barrels and a relatively light build. Other weapons inspired by the MG-42 included the Yugoslav M53, Swiss MG-51, Austrian MG-74, Belgian FN MAG, and British designs, all drawing from the universal machine gun concept, capable of both light and heavy rolls. Variants of the MG-42 appeared in numerous post-war conflicts. French soldiers used them in Indochina, the British in Malaya, Yugoslavs in the Balkan Wars, and Germans in Korea as part of UN forces. During Portugal's colonial wars in the 1960s, Portuguese troops used the MG-42 in Angola and Mozambique. These conflicts showed that, even decades later, the MG-42's design remained relevant. The ability to suppress an enemy quickly was prized in counterinsurgency and guerrilla warfare too. When studying the MG-42, we must not forget the human lives tied to it. Every shot meant a life taken or wounded. In former soldiers' memoirs are stories of survivors who escaped Hitler's saw only by chance. Accounts by American veterans who crawled up the beaches of Normandy paint stark scenes. I saw streams of bullets whip around me, heard them hiss in the sand. Each burst was like a scythe cutting. These stories remind us that behind every design lies suffering, and that weapons must also be judged in their moral dimension. In this video, you'll learn why the MG-42 remains so deeply rooted in memory and how its history can deepen our understanding of military history. In a moment, we'll show how machine gunners' experiences resonated in post-war society and what they can tell us about human resilience. For veterans who served as machine gunners, returning to civilian life wasn't easy. Many had to deal with physical consequences: injured hands, damaged hearing, chronic back pain. Harder still was the psychological burden. PTSD wasn't diagnosed in the 1940s and 1950s. Former soldiers often suffered nightmares, anxiety, and guilt. Heinrich Severloh said he broke down multiple times after the war, and only meeting the American chaplain he had wounded helped him begin to forgive himself. Some veterans tried to bury the past in work. Others became pacifists and lectured about the horrors of war. In Germany, associations of former soldiers offered help finding work and psychological counseling. The gunner's experience became part of a broader debate about the responsibility of the individual who obeys orders yet bears personal guilt. In post-war literature, machine gunners appear as tragic figures, technically capable but emotionally broken. Novels like All Quiet on the Western Front compare machine gun fire to the drumbeat of fate. In German literature, the MG-42 became a symbol of destruction. Authors write of its sound carving into the nation's soul. In French and American films, the MG-42 often serves as a backdrop to portray Nazi superiority or cruelty. In the Czech film Liberation of Prague, there's a scene with an MG-42 where a Czech resistance fighter risks his life to silence a nest on Wenceslas Square, a symbolic reminder of ordinary people's courage. Historians in the latter half of the 20th century began analyzing the MG-42 as part of the broader context of German war industry. Studies noted that despite technical excellence, the weapon couldn't change the war's outcome. Numerically stronger and economically mightier allies stayed a step ahead. Today, researchers focus on oral history. collecting memories from the last surviving veterans. These testimonies are valuable because they show how conflicted gunners' feelings were. Pride in protecting comrades on one hand, trauma and regret for the lives taken on the other. In the 1980s and 1990s, meetings of veterans in Germany and France brought former enemies together. MG-42 gunners met American and British veterans to discuss their experiences, creating a unique platform for reconciliation. At one such meeting, an American veteran said, "I'll never forget that sound, but today I'm speaking to the man who ran that gun. I feel not hatred, only sympathy." Such encounters fostered the understanding that soldiers on both sides were often victims of political decisions and propaganda. In this video, you'll see how such meetings can promote peace and how individual stories enrich our understanding of history. In a moment, we'll reveal that even after such terrible experience, a path to forgiveness and reconciliation can follow. The MG-42 remains one of the most famous machine guns in history. Its development shows how wartime requirements accelerate innovation and how economic pressures can become a technical advantage. A weapon meant to cut costs and simplify production became a symbol of destructive force that could reshape the tactics of entire armies. Yet this story isn't only about metal and machinery. It's about the people who served the MG-42 and those who faced its effects. Machine gunners bore enormous physical and psychological burdens. Some became legends. Others remained unknown. All faced a moral dilemma. They protected their comrades even as they destroyed other lives. Their fates lead us to questions. How does war shape character? And how do we live with our past? The horrifying work of MG-42 gunners reminds us that behind every technical innovation lies human experience. The weapon that emptied battlefields 80 years ago still resonates in culture and memory. Today, as modern armies use even more advanced systems, it's important not to forget how earlier inventions affected society and moral values. If this story interested you, please support our work by liking the video and sharing it with friends. Your reactions motivate us to bring more in-depth looks at history and to show how past conflicts shape our present.